Hi, my name is Ray Poynter, and I'm going to be taking you through a presentation that looks at what next. So for those of you who caught the previous presentation, What Now, most of the messages really in that presentation were pretty negative. It was looking at what was happening, what should we start doing, what should we put in place, and so on. Well, there are some bad news in this presentation too. I'm going to start with some thoughts about the timelines and scenarios, some of the challenges for businesses that are really struggling at the moment, but I'm also going to highlight successes. I'm going to highlight a strategy for working out what is going to come next and what you need to do, and what is the role of insights in that process. So let's start with a little bit about the timeline. It's beginning to look from a lot of different data sources that we're perhaps halfway through the outbreak. This is one of the best data sources that I've been following. It's from the Financial Times. It's regularly updated. It's got to a position now where we can see that the US has begun to turn the tide, that Spain, Italy, France have been improving for a while. There are still worrying trends, Russia, India, Brazil. But we can see that a lot of countries are getting on top of this because they're beginning to understand what is necessary. However, if you look at the curve for China, if you look at the curve for Iran, if you look at the curve for Italy, one of the things you will see is that there is a long tail. It's not a symmetrical shape. The speed that things got worse was much faster than the speed at which they get better. So the halfway point isn't where the peak is, it's somewhat after that. The world is a really varied place. So here is just part of the data from the Financial Times for countries basically from Algeria to Mexico, because that's what fits on the screen. If you look at Australia, fantastic performance, the line going down, down, down. If you look at Belgium, a relatively small country, the top right on this screen, you can see that it went up really quite high for a small country, starting to come down. China, we can see, has progressed right the way through the process. If we look along the line to Brazil, the second line down, second one in, you can see a really worrying pattern there. Down to the bottom line, and you'll see Italy. So there is no single pattern. And until more or less every country in the world has got on top of virus and COVID-19, then there won't be a return to international travel in the way that we used to know it. So even if a country like New Zealand gets to 0 cases, it will still be challenged in terms of allowing people to leave and enter the country. So we are seeing a lot of things still to come. What's going to happen next? Now this is a really nice graphic about a really horrible thing. It shows the number of deaths. It smooths them to take a 7-day rolling average because the data is really quite flaky in terms of which day did somebody actually die and how that was reported. But what you can see is it's like a teardrop, which I suppose is kind of fitting, and it's beginning to narrow. It's changing, so the USA didn't used to be a major feature. It became a major feature, but the number is going down. Europe went up and it's beginning to come down. We see some other worrying patterns. That's LATAM and the Caribbean in the grey section that's beginning to expand. But again, this gives us the feeling that maybe we're more than halfway through the pandemic. You know something extraordinary is happening when something like this happens. The other day I noticed one of the right-wing business newspapers quoting the Bank of America, who was quoting Lenin, because this is just so true. There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. Remember, we are talking about the world before March was fundamentally different to the world as we know it now. We're in a very much changed situation, an unprecedented situation, and one where the future is not clear. Just to give you a note about how unprecedented, this again is from the Bank of America looking at the fiscal support in the United States you can see the First World War, enormous amount of government spending. The Great Depression, and the spending that was going on there, and Roosevelt. The Second World War, enormous amount of spending. The GFC, the global financial crisis, it created a bump. We have already massively surpassed the scale of government spending that was necessary for that. We are spending more like it's a war, and this is quite unprecedented outside of wartime. Again, just to give you a feeling for how unprecedented the times were, recently the price of a barrel of oil, was negative. It was about minus $37 at one point. They were paying people to take barrels of oil away because they didn't think they were going to be able to store it. So that, again, fundamentally unprecedented. About a third of the world are in or are coming out of or are going into lockdown. Again, just unbelievable. If we were to go back to February and say this is what was going to happen, it would be really hard for any of us to have taken that seriously. So we can see the sheer scale of what is going on. In terms of jobs, here are different predictions. Fewer than 50% of working Americans will have a paycheck in May. 50%. More than 71% of firms in the UK have furloughed some or all of their staff. They think that a quarter of Europe's jobs are at risk. Unemployment rates across Asia Pacific going up much higher than they did in the recession. Up to 780,000 jobs in Australia lost in just 3 weeks. So colossal change in employment. Now, fantastic news around the world. We're beginning to see the lockdowns are being eased. We saw news recently that Spain, after 6 weeks of lockdown, are being allowed to go out and take some exercise. Children are being allowed to go out for the first time in 6 weeks from being locked up in their homes. And of course, for some people, that means being locked up in a 3-bedroom home. For other people, that means being locked up in a small flat with very little space and resources. So yes, around the world, fantastic. We're seeing changes. But actually, look at what it means. It means one person walking on their own. It means somebody in the hairdressers with a face mask with the seats next to them empty. It means people in China hugging each other with very restricted travel, wearing face masks, normally keeping distancing going. So it's life, Jim, but not as we know it, as they used to say in the Star Trek movies. When we get the lockdowns being eased, it will not be that we are back where we used to be. It will be a very different, slower, more spaced out existence. What's happening in the research world? So one of the things that I'm involved in is an organisation called NewMR, and we've just done 2 waves of research into what is happening to the research people. Over 80% of market researchers are working from home. About half are reporting a drop in their personal income. About half seem to be coping, but about 20%, 1 in 5, are really having some level of problems. So you need to be looking towards your staff and making sure that you've identified the ones who have the problems. And most people, not 20%, not half, most people are reporting their productivity has dropped. Even people who are used to working from home, this is not normal working from home. And so productivity has gone down. You need to factor that in. If you are a manager, if you're an employer, if you're a team leader, you can't expect the same throughput. If you want to read more information, then there's a blog that we've written, Be Kind to Yourself, Be Kind to Others, and also How Are Market Researchers, What Do They Need, a report into the first wave of that study, and you'll be able to access both of those. There are changes going on right throughout industry, some very interesting changes happening with the advertisers. These are changes that have already happened. Displaying empathy for what stakeholders are facing, demonstrating the brand is there to help. A few weeks ago, we had a presentation about human experience, and we talked about authenticity, we talked about empathy, and we talked about belonging. And boy, have those become relevant. Pulling most price and item focused messaging. Crafting new ads from existing footage to ensure cultural relevance. Scrapping creative executions that are not representative of the current climate. Acknowledging school closures and social distancing, so you can't be asking people to do some of the things you used to do. Moving over to providing essential and useful information. And avoiding lifestyle imagery based on travel, spring breaks, social gatherings, and all of these sorts of things. Where do we expect advertising to change and move to? And this comes from the Association of National Advertisers, polling 196 of their people. More showing empathy for the contemporary situation, but keep the brand relevance. Removing content that may be inappropriate, insensitive, or tone deaf. Tone deaf marketing has been one of the real failures that some brands have done. Not many, but they've been really noticed when they've done it over the last few weeks. Being more comforting and less promotional. Adapting to emerging consumer needs on an ongoing basis. People's needs are changing. Brands need to recognize and work with that. Focusing on products that are most pertinent and useful in an increasingly virtual world. How can we make this relevant in a virtual world? Now, there's been some talk with some clients about, I'm going to stop my normal research. I'm going to stop my ad hoc testing of concepts. I'm going to phase back a lot of my trackers because now is not normal. And what I think I should do is wait for things to get back to normal. What they don't realize is they're betting on a prediction. They are predicting that we will get back to normal and that it will be reasonably soon. And what we know about predictions is that most predictions are wrong. There's a wonderful study from Philip Tetlock. It was a very long-term study, and it showed that the average expert's ability to make accurate predictions was only slightly better than a non-expert doing random guessing, or as he said, as a chimpanzee throwing a dart at the board to pick which number is likely to happen next. We are just not very good at predictions. And anybody who is holding up their insight work and their marketing work because now is not normal and I'm going to wait till it gets back to normal is making a really big bet on a prediction. And in some cases, they haven't acknowledged that they're making a bet and that it's based on a prediction. They just think it's going to happen. There is an alternative, and it's called scenario thinking. And this is something that I would strongly advocate you do. At the moment, there are two key scenarios. The virus is controlled soon, or the virus is not controlled soon. We cannot tell which of those is going to happen. The experts can't tell. They have an opinion, they're making predictions, but they can't tell. The economy will recover soon, or the economy does not recover soon. Again, we do not know which of those are going to happen. Economists have got a rubbish track record in predicting which type of recession we're likely to have and how quickly it's going to change. So if we take those two situations, those two factors, we apply something called the flip-flop mechanism, which means we apply each of the combinations. So the first one would be the scenario where the virus is controlled soon and the economy recovers soon. And that is the back to normalish scenario that people who think they can suspend things until we get back to normal are betting on. The back to normalish. It won't be absolutely the same, but it will be massively the same as before the virus. We might also have the virus is controlled soon and the economy does not recover soon. A major recession. At the moment, much, much bigger than the GFC in 2008. but it's a different structure. So it won't necessarily stay deeper for longer, but it could do. So we have this doubt and concern. Another combination, virus is not controlled soon and the economy does recover soon. Now, I think this one is somewhere between incredibly unlikely or incredibly unhuman. This is the one that some of the more right-wing capitalist backers in the United States are pushing very heavily. They say the damage to the economy is worse than the deaths. We should go back to a much more normal situation. Yes, instead of having 100,000 people die in North America, we'd have 1 million people die in North America. But actually, that is not so very different to the number of people who die from cancer and various other things. We could live with that if we kept our economy going. So it is a scenario that we need to keep in mind, even if we don't like that scenario. Virus is not controlled and the economy does not recover. In that situation, we are in a whole new world. It means that we're in lockdown, maybe for 6 months out of every 12 months for a couple of years, that we have incredible restrictions on the ability to travel, maybe on the ability to import goods. Maybe most people can't work. We don't have cinemas and restaurants up and running again. So that world is a really, really different world. And we have no way of knowing which of these four scenarios is the most likely. In fact, it won't be any one of them because within each scenario, there are many levels of detail. It could be slightly higher or slightly lower within that scenario. The picture in Australia may be different to the picture in the United Kingdom, may be different to the picture in the United States. So there are some details still to work with those, but fundamentally, these are the four things we're looking at. So you need to plan for all four scenarios. If that happens, what we would do is this. If that happens, what we would do is this. So you put those plans through the process so that you're ready to work with them. Now, let's think about the impact of the pandemic on brands. For a few brands, it's been very positive. So Amazon have been shipping as much stuff as they can manage to get out of the doors, and they've actually had an increase in their ad revenue because they have been so busy in their retailing front. It's driven the ad revenue up. Nearly all the other advertising platforms have seen a decline. Sales of toilet paper up, hand cleaner up. So lots and lots there. Of course, even for those companies, there have been some negatives. They've had staff with health concerns and so on. Then there are the majority of companies who have been largely negative, maybe with a few positive things within that. So in the last webinar, what now? We looked at 4 business models for those companies who are badly impacted by the pandemic. Hibernate, hunker down, pivot, or operate. In Hibernate, you have to close the business. This is true for many restaurants, it's true for many airlines, cruise companies, football clubs I'm going to mention in a moment, all sorts of sports clubs. So you turn things off as much as you can, you try to avoid too much money leaking out, and you seek government assistance. Hunker down, brands that are going to continue, but they're going to sell less stuff. So the car companies are a good example here. Home furnishings and all of these sorts of companies, if their business is online, are by and large selling less stuff. If their business is face to face, they're closer to the Hibernate case. Pivot are companies that stop doing X and start doing Y. So they'll ramp up the delivery options or they start making ventilators. And the operate are those companies who say, you know what, this could go on for quite a long time. We are going to have to find out how to operate in this environment. So we're going to cut costs, we're going to be more agile, we're going to see where there are things that we can do, and we're going to work in that way. So let's look at how some of those companies are responding. So Dettol make a whole range of disinfectants and products like that. They have no difficulty selling their stuff at the moment. In fact, they have difficulty supplying it because demand is so high. So what is their role with something like marketing and advertising? They don't need to drive sales, but they do want to drive good behavior that will hopefully last beyond the pandemic, and they want to associate themselves with being part of the solution. So this ad was broadcast in India in the early days of the pandemic. I don't speak a word of the language being used here. I imagine that it's Hindi, but I understand everything that is going on in this ad, and I think you will too.
अरे पहले हाथ तो धो लो।
शेर भी कभी अपने पंजे धोते हैं दीदी?
पंजे तो चूहे भी नहीं धोते मामा जी।
शेरों के पंजे भी अब से धुलेंगे, यू रोकेंगे टोकेंगे हो। खाने से पहले सदा हाथ धोना कभी भी ना भूलेंगे हो। जो माँ ने सिखाया वो सबको सिखाएंगे, एवरीबॉडी हाथ धो। ना फैले बीमारी जो आदत हमारी, डेटॉल डेटॉल हो।
अरे अब कौन जाएगा इतनी दूर?
हॉस्पिटल तो और भी दूर है अंकल, वहाँ ना जाना पड़ जाए।
कोई बहाने नहीं, अब चलेंगे, लेजी नहीं होगे हो। इन्फेक्शन मिटाना है, सबको बताना है, डेटॉल डेटॉल हो। खाने से पहले सदा हाथ धोना कभी भी ना भूलेंगे हो।
अच्छा बताओ, अब यहाँ कैसे होगा तुम्हारा डेटॉल डेटॉल हो?
घर हो या बाहर हो, पानी हो या ना हो, डेटॉल डेटॉल हो।
So that last part there is showing that even in third class rail, you can do something about it. Really effective, I think. Now let's move to a brand in hibernation. Everton Football Club in the UK. This is true of football sports clubs all around the world. Things were going fantastic well. The English Premier League, Euro 2020 coming through, live football, streaming football. Then all of a sudden, all football cancelled. Hibernate but actively. So they launched the Blue Family, a campaign that's been running since March in tandem with the Liverpool-based side's official charity arm, Everton, in the community. So for those of you not from the UK, there are two leading football clubs in Liverpool. One, of course, is Liverpool, and the other is Everton. They've been offering support and guidance to vulnerable, socially isolated members of their fandom. They've used the CRM and phone system. I think this is one of the best things they've done to make outbound calls to check in on vulnerable fans. They're looking and saying, what is the purpose of our CRM? It doesn't have to be about marketing. The same tool can be used really effectively to do good. And millions of fans around the world tuning into adult content. And I love this. Favorite players, including reading bedtime stories. What a great way to keep the community in touch and moving forward during hibernation. Then we get some hunker down brands, and I'm going to show you a couple of different approaches to this. Do you remember I showed you in the what Advertisers are doing? They were recutting old material to make it culturally relevant. And the first one I'm going to show you is Budweiser doing exactly that. And then a really striking ad from BMW, keeping themselves relevant but passing on a social message.
Pick up good yardage on the play. You know, the best part of this defense is their defensive line and their interior.
Hello? Hey, who? What's up? Nothing, B. In quarantine. Having a bud. What's up with you?
Nothing. Quarantining, having a bud.
True. True.
What's up? What's up? Yo, who's that?
Yo! Yo, pick up the phone.
Hello?
What's that?
What's up? Yo, where's Dookie?
Yo, Duke. Yo.
What's that?
What's that?
So you okay, B?
I'm good, B. Just quarantining, having a bud. Thanks for checking in.
And this next ad is just 30 seconds, and it's amazing how much you can say when saying so little. Great ways of keeping the brand relevant, doing good, and still marketing in a sensible, sensitive way. Now for ASICS, this was supposed to be such a good year. In the run-up to the Tokyo Olympics, they were planning to fly journalists from all over the world into Tokyo. They were going to show 3 new shoes. For those of you not involved in the running world, you may not be aware of what a phenomenal arms race is going on at the moment. Nike kicked it off with their Wonder shoes and the breaking the 2-hour marathon and all sorts of new technologies. And all the other brands need to be showing what they can do, and now is the moment, or now, as it was in February, is the moment for that. So they're an operate brand. They can't wait till next year because Nike would just get further ahead. So what did they do? They distributed VR headsets, the Oculus ones. They developed some new software so they could do a virtual press launch. They did that launch. The journalists were able to put on the headsets and experience the shoes as those sports people were going to do. Great coverage for the shoes, good coverage for the tech. It was a much greener way of doing business, and here was a very interesting comment from one of the journalists who took part. What's more important, however, is what this launch represents in a world where social distancing will be the norm for several more months. I suspect more than months. The longer COVID-19 rages on, the more other companies will look to lean on virtual reality. This is at least a first good step. Hell, accountants at plenty of tech companies are probably doing a cost-benefit analysis of buying a truck full of Oculus Quests right now for currying to and from journalists' houses. Interesting thought. And then there are 2 types of pivoting that we need to mention. Companies that can't operate, and so they're pivoting to help. So some of them are some of the garment manufacturers are manufacturing scrubs and face masks. Some of the technology companies are producing ventilators. Some of the perfume companies, the brewing companies, the spirits companies are producing hand sanitizer. People are housing the homeless, fantastic. Feeding people in need. So what we see on the right hand side is Nando's have opened some of their kitchens and they're feeding NHS and other selected workers and frontline workers. Using the ad spend for better purposes. So InBev have used a large amount of their ad spend to help the Red Cross. Fantastic initiatives. But of course there are also companies who are pivoting their business so that they can stay in business. This one here, PunchPass. In the past, they provided a range of services to the small fitness companies, the gyms, the yoga studios. All of those are closed in most of their markets. So now they are providing a Zoom-based virtual system to those same people so that they can continue to trade as a virtual operation. Mobile Escape, they provided in-school escape room programs. Now they have a mail version where they mail these things out. You open the package, you play the game, and you send back the feedback online. So whole new businesses. In the insights world, of course, an enormous number of market research projects and consultants have moved face-to-face research online. So again, that is a pivot to stay in business. Fundamentally, why do organizations need insights? Because everybody is flying blind. Remember what I said earlier, these are completely unprecedented times. Nobody alive today has managed brands and organizations through times like this. We need to see a new way of doing business, and for that you need insights. One of the things you're going to use your insights for is to scout for signs of which scenario is happening, how is it happening, how fast is it happening, what are the implications for your customers in your marketplace. So let's think about those positively impacted brands. one of the top things they should be doing insights research into is, how are our staff? Can they cope? Are they feeling safe? So these people are having to travel to work. They are having to work alongside colleagues. They may have people at home who are along lockdown. So all sorts of issues. How can we avoid being tone deaf? Phrases like, this is a great opportunity, which I occasionally hear, are just so massively inappropriate. You want to be testing that. Now, some of that will come from social media listening, looking at what sorts of ads, what sort of marketing are being talked about badly, but also if you have an insight community, if you have a tracking program, if you have a CX program, listening to whether or not you're tone deaf. And that brings us to the brand and CX tracking. You're going to want to tweak that to make it relevant to this situation. Are you hitting the right notes? Are you helping people in the right way? And you also need to think about, when will this rush end? So as things start to unwind, will people want as much hand wash? Will they want as much toilet paper as they've been buying? In fact, for something like toilet paper, will there be a real dip in sales while people start to work their way through the backlog that they've bought and stashed around their houses? These are really key issues for the positively impacted brands. For the Hibernate brands, the ones that are not trading at the moment, how are our furloughed, stood down staff coping? After the lockdown, what will customers want and when will they want it? This is a really, really key issue. If we're a cruise company, we can probably assume that these people, that the cruise fans are not going to come back really quickly. If we're a restaurant brand, it becomes a lot harder. Are people going to want to come really quickly to see us because they are desperate to have a nice meal out? Or are they going to feel, well, I've got used to cooking and I'm a bit nervous about being in a crowd? What can we start doing now? What sort of things should we do as the lockdowns start to open? Should we start providing this limited service? Should we do a little bit of pivoting within our Hibernate? What about the Hunker down brands, the brands that are operating and waiting for it to be finished? We certainly want to ask, how are our staff? Are they coping? Do they feel safe? Because they are still working, remember, or some of them are furloughed. Track the key brand and customer experience elements. You're going to want to cut your budget, so you're not going to be doing as much research. So look at less expensive ways, but make sure that you still know what people think about your brand. And those people who are still experiencing your brand, you need to know how they're experiencing it. Does it make them feel safe? Does it make them feel that they want to keep doing business with you? What are our opportunities? There are some opportunities that you should look around and say, you know what? We can help people in this way. We can meet this need. We can provide this to people who need this service. When and how will this end? So we're seeing the lockdowns, we're seeing the recessions. It may be that if there is an ongoing recession and if there is an ongoing virus problem and you are selling luxury cars, what you will see is a gradual return to sales, because people will have the money if they've still got an income stream. Remember, half of the people are still working. They're not spending as much money. So you may well find that even in that really bad scenario, that there will be an uptake in that. So you want to know, how are things going to change? How is it going to end? The pivot brands. How are your people? Are they coping with this new way of doing business? Your research needs to be agile research. You need to focus on build, test, learn. You've got to turn things around quickly. You want to look at the communications, and this is the only group that are thinking strategically. If you are pivoting, you absolutely have to be thinking about the strategy going forward. You've got to be thinking that this isn't just about the next 3 months. This is a good thing to be doing ongoing. And the operate brands. Yeah, how are our people coping? These people are working. You need to look after them. Track and build proactive relationships with customers. Your customers maybe slightly fewer in number, but you want to make an even stronger relationship with them. You want to be testing those communications and the concept tests as part of Operate. We've talked a lot about the human experience here at Potentiate over the last few webinars, and this is fundamentally important. So you want to be modifying your customer experience programs to reflect the new realities. So even when people aren't experiencing your service because they can't get out or you can't deliver it, you want to show them you care and just, hey, checking in, rather like the Bud ad, checking in on buds. We think that you should be blending insight communities and customer experience if you've got access to both. We call it T-shaped research. So broad is the customer experience and the stick is the deep part where you can go in and really talk to people in the insight community. You've got to keep checking in with your staff who are working and your staff who are not working. You need to find out what is happening to people in society right now. And actually, you might want to do this yourself if you've got access to tools like an insight community. But there's a lot of third-party research doing this. So the UK's Market Research Society, the MRS, they have a list on their website of over 50 different trackers which can be accessed. Some of those are UK focused, but many of them are global. So there's a lot of research about what is happening to people. How is the lockdown affecting them? What are they saying about it? There is some great qualitative stuff in there as well. You've really got to avoid being tone deaf. You have got to look for what are your opportunities to help people? What are your opportunities to provide something that makes the world a better place? What is your opportunities to meet services that aren't being delivered? You want to think about agile, build, test, learn type research where you can respond really quickly and inexpensively. And the two big issues that we're being asked about the most and that we're looking into are understanding what people will do when the lockdowns are eased. What are the first few things they're going to do? What will start coming back to some level of normality quickest? And beyond that, when people can travel, when they can move, when they can change jobs, when they can go to the cinema or a football match, what will they do? How will that be changed from now? Will it be the same? Will it be different? Which order will things go back to being normal in? So, to summarize that in what next? With any luck, we may be halfway through the first phase of the pandemic. It could come back, of course, in the Northern Hemisphere winter in a few months. Hopefully it won't. But there are signs of change. However, the recession has hardly begun to bite yet. It could be much worse later this year. Have that in mind. Don't bet on one prediction. Saying I'm going to wait till things get back to normal is a really big bet. You're betting the company on a prediction. We suggest you use scenario thinking. If you want to know more about scenario thinking, get in touch with us. Think about humans, not products. A couple of webinars ago, I showed a great quote from Seth Godin, who said, "Don't find customers for your products. Find products for your customers." That is even more true now. Look at the people who are your community and find out what they need. And start by checking that your people are okay. You need to be clear about what your strategy is. If you're a Hunker Down brand, you're a Hunker Down brand and you have strategies that match that. If you're an Operate brand, you have Operate strategies. You use insight to support that. You want to match all of your activities to that strategy. And remember, you're flying blind. Everybody else is flying blind. You need to lean on your insights, and you need to take insights from all available sources. So you want to be looking at social media. You want to be looking at published studies by other organizations. You want to be seeing if you can share information with other bodies. You should be asking your governments and your trade associations to do some composite work, and you should be using your own resources. Remember, stay safe, be kind. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.